Why did the room go silent the moment she stopped talking? 200 recruits sat frozen on cold aluminum benches, their boots lined with military precision, their breathing shallow. The water behind her was perfectly still, a massive training pool stretching into shadow, blue lights shimmering faintly across its surface. The smell of chlorine hung heavy, sharp enough to sting the eyes. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened anyone. She had simply stopped explaining. Senior Chief Anna Sharma stood beside a rebreather unit laid out on white cloth, hands resting calmly at her sides. Lean, controlled, unimpressive to the careless eye. The kind of woman people underestimated without even realizing they were doing it. "The body doesn't panic first," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "It lies to you, it tells you you're fine." Her voice carried without effort, no edge, no drama. "That's how people die underwater." A few recruits swallowed. One adjusted his posture, suddenly very aware of his own heartbeat. They'd heard stories about her before this briefing. Most were rumors, half-formed legends whispered during late-night cleaning rotations. That she'd spent more time below 200 feet than most pilots had in the air. That she'd once aborted a mission because her instincts noticed something the instruments didn't. That she didn't talk about her past because it didn't need explaining. Anna Sharma didn't care what they believed. Facts were enough. She reached for a valve, fingers moving with deliberate precision, when the double doors at the far end of the natatorium slammed open. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Boots slapped against wet tile, loud, confident, unapologetic. Director Rex Thorne entered, as if the space already belonged to him. Broad shoulders, thick arms stretching the seams of a black polo, tactical pants that had never seen real mud, a gold trident embroidered proudly over his chest, large enough to make sure no one missed it. He clapped his hands once. Several recruits flinched. "All right," Thorne boomed, "let's speed this up." Anna didn't turn. "Senior Chief," he continued, strolling closer, voice dripping with amusement, "you're losing them with all this science talk. This isn't a classroom, it's a training floor." She finished securing the valve before straightening. "This is a safety brief," she said evenly. "For closed-circuit dive operations, details matter." Thorne laughed, loud, dismissive. "Back in my day, we learned by doing," he said. "We didn't sit around talking about oxygen like it was poetry." A ripple of unease moved through the recruits. Everyone could feel it, the tension coiling, invisible but sharp. "The protocols exist because people died," Anna replied. "They're written in blood." "That did it." Thorne stopped inches from her, too close, deliberate, his shadow swallowed hers. "Are you questioning my experience?" he growled. She met his eyes, calm, unblinking. "I'm statting procedure." She took a half-step back. To her, it was de-escalation. To him, it looked like weakness. He smiled thinly, the kind of smile built from ego, not humor. "You paper pushers made the team soft," he said, jabbing a finger into her shoulder. "Scared of everything." Anna felt the pressure, logged it, filed it mentally. "Director," she said, voice still procedural, "you need to step away from the instructional area." The room held its breath. Thorne's face darkened. His identity, his authority, his myth, had just been challenged by someone who didn't look like a threat. "I'll show you disruption," he snapped. "And don't forget I'm a Navy SEAL." Then he swung. It wasn't fast. It wasn't skilled. It was rage disguised as confidence. Anna didn't retreat. She moved. Not away from the punch, but into it. Her left hand redirected his wrist. Her right controlled the elbow. His momentum became hers. In less than 3 seconds, physics did what ego couldn't understand. Thorne hit the tile hard. The sound echoed. He gasped, pinned by a geometry he couldn't solve. Anna held him for one controlled beat. Then she released him. No glare, no victory. Get medical, she said calmly to the stunned junior officers. He slipped on the wet deck. She turned to the recruits. This concludes the safety brief. Dismissed. And just like that, she walked away, leaving behind silence, disbelief, and a man whose power had evaporated in front of 200 witnesses. But the real impact hadn't happened yet. The punch was loud. The echo would be quieter and far more dangerous. Sometimes, the most disciplined response doesn't look like strength. It looks like restraint. Why did the hallway feel louder than the punch ever had? Anna Sharma noticed it the moment she stepped out of the natatorium. The echoes followed her, boots on tile, distant voices, the hum of machinery, but something else rode beneath the noise. A shift, subtle, unsettling, like pressure building where no gauge existed. She didn't look back. That was the first thing people misunderstood about her. They thought silence meant avoidance. That calm meant uncertainty. In truth, Anna had already moved on. The incident was over. A problem had presented itself. She had solved it with the minimum force required. End of sequence. That's how systems worked. But institutions were not systems. They were organisms. And organisms reacted emotionally when embarrassed. By the time she reached her office, the story had already begun mutating. She closed the door behind her and sat at the bare government tissue desk. The room was small, windowless, lit by a fluorescent panel that hummed faintly. She liked that. Predictable sounds, predictable light. Her hands were steady as she logged into the secure terminal. She didn't replay the moment in her head. No what-ifs, no delayed adrenaline. She had trained that out of herself years ago. Emotion was a lagging indicator. Data came first. 3 camera feeds. Multiple angles. Uncompressed. Time-stamped. She watched them without sound. Once. Twice. The sequence was clean, the aggression unambiguous. She began typing. Clinical language, passive voice, no interpretation, no commentary. She did not write about his tone. She did not write about his ego. She did not write about the way his finger lingered on her shoulder like a claim. That was noise. She wrote about motion, contact, cause, and effect. When she finished, the report was short, efficient, dangerous in its precision. She sent it directly to Jag. Then she leaned back in her chair and waited. That waiting, that was harder than the takedown. Because Anna knew something the recruits didn't, something Rex Thorne certainly didn't. Truth didn't move fast. Power did. And power hated being made small. By 800 the next morning, she was summoned to the base commander's office. Captain Marcus Evans didn't look angry. That worried her more. He gestured for her to sit. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight. The executive officer stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes troubled. I have 2 reports, Evans said carefully. Yours and Director Thorne. Anna nodded once. She felt it then, not fear, not anger, but something colder. Isolation. Thorne's version was longer, emotional, dense with accusation. Words like insubordination, unprovoked, excessive force. The language of someone trying to control a narrative, not describe an event. Pending investigation, Evans continued, I'm placing you on administrative duty. The words landed softly, too softly. Her clearance would be temporarily revoked, her training role suspended, restricted movement, quarters and admin building only. A procedural sidelining. A quiet exile. Understood, Anna said. No argument, no defense. She stood, saluted, and left. Behind her she heard the executive officer speak, low, uncomfortable, but Evans cut him off. Anna didn't slow her pace. In the hallway, whispers had already started. She felt them more than she heard them. The subtle pauses when she passed, the looks that slid away too quickly. By noon, the rumor had crystallized. She snapped. She was unstable. She crossed a line. The irony almost made her smile. Administrative duty was designed to erase relevance. They placed her in a windowless cubicle digitizing outdated supply manifests, old paper, old ink, old mistakes no one wanted to own anymore. She worked quietly, efficiently, logged hours, followed orders. Inside, something unfamiliar stirred. Not doubt. Disappointment. Not in herself, but in the system. She had believed, perhaps naively, that evidence mattered more than influence. That procedure, when followed precisely, would protect the operator who adhered to it. She had believed the math would hold. But math assumed honesty. Rex Thorne wasn't playing math. He was playing people. He didn't retreat. He advanced. That afternoon, he stood before the same recruits, the witnesses, and reframed the incident, cast himself as a mentor silenced by new standards, suggested that discipline had been replaced by fragility. Anna wasn't there to hear it. But the story reached her anyway. It always did. Each version sharpened the blade a little more. She remained silent. Not because she was afraid. Because she was watching. 48 hours later, the base went dark. Not literally, digitally. It began as a flicker in the Combat Information Center, a hesitation in signal response, then cascading failures. Comms dropped, feeds went blind. The simulated enemy moved like a ghost through their network. Confusion escalated to fear. They were deaf, blind, vulnerable. Anna felt it before anyone called her. A low-priority diagnostic alert pulsed on her ancient monitor. She froze. That alert wasn't part of the admin system. It was hers. Something she'd installed years ago, quiet, overlooked, still alive. She studied the data stream, her world narrowing to patterns and timing. 90 seconds. That was all she needed. The attack wasn't brilliance. It was exploitation, a known flaw, a lazy piece of code no one had wanted to prioritize. She warned them. They hadn't listened. Now the system was bleeding. She reached for the analog phone. Copper wire immune. Bypass the handshake, she said calmly when the line connected. Kill protocol 799, manual route, 3-second window. There was hesitation on the other end. Then trust. The screens cleared. Green icons bloomed back to life. The strike group breathed again. In the CIC, cheers erupted. Anna hung up the phone. She didn't smile. She returned to her manifest. Across the base, realization spread slowly, heavily. The woman they'd sidelined had just saved the exercise. The report they'd ignored months ago described the exact failure they just suffered. The silence around her name changed. It deepened. That night, alone in her quarters, Anna took out the old patch, the Black Phoenix. She repaired a single frayed thread with meticulous care. Not because it needed it. Because she did. Faith, she reminded herself, was not emotional. It was procedural. Evidence would surface. Systems corrected eventually. But not without pressure. And pressure always found the truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't argue. Sometimes it waits. And then acts. Why did the command deck feel colder after the screens came back online? No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it, the quiet shift that followed relief, the kind that settles in when adrenaline fades and accountability takes its place. The maps were stable again. Friendly icons glowed green. The simulated enemy had been pushed back into irrelevance. The crisis was over. The question no one wanted to ask was why it had taken a sidelined senior chief, working from an obsolete terminal with a revoked clearance, to fix it. Captain Evans stood at the center of the Combat Information Center, hands resting on the rail, eyes locked on the data feed. Around him, officers and enlisted specialists moved with renewed purpose, but their voices were subdued. The celebration had been brief, professional, almost guilty. "How did she know?" someone finally asked. Master Chief Torres didn't look up from his console. "Because she already told us," he said quietly. "We just didn't listen." That sentence landed heavier than any after-action report. Anna Sharma didn't hear the cheering. She didn't hear the sudden scramble of realization rippling through the base. She was back in her quarters, seated at the small desk beneath a single lamp, entering a log into a private, triple-encrypted file. She didn't write about vindication. She didn't write about anger. She wrote about patterns, ego-driven aggression, institutional latency, predictable outcomes. Her mind wasn't replaying the humiliation of being sidelined. It was already stepping back, zooming out, examining the larger architecture of failure. This wasn't about Thorne anymore. It was about what happened when systems protected influence instead of integrity. She closed the log and sat back. For the first time since the incident, she felt something stir beneath her composure. Not satisfaction. Fatigue. Being right, she had learned, was exhausting when it came at the cost of trust. The call came just after dawn. "Senior Chief Sharma," Captain Evans said, his voice measured, stripped of its earlier distance. "I need you in my office. Immediately." No qualifiers, no tone of command. Anna dressed in silence. As she walked across the base, she noticed the difference. Conversation stopped, not abruptly but respectfully. A few heads turned. Some eyes followed her with something close to awe. That unsettled her more than suspicion ever had. Reverence created distance. She preferred clarity. Inside Evans's office, the atmosphere was different. The executive officer stood beside the desk. A JAG captain she recognized sat to one side, hands folded neatly. Rex Thorne was not there. That absence spoke volumes. "Senior Chief," Evans began, standing as she entered, "your administrative status is suspended pending immediate review." She nodded. "We reviewed the Crimson Trident logs," he continued, "and your report from 6 months ago." He didn't say ignored. He didn't say dismissed. But they all understood the word hovering between them. "The video from the natatorium has also been verified," the JAG captain added calmly. "Untampered, complete." Silence settled. Anna waited. Evans exhaled slowly. Director Thorne's complaint is unraveling. There it was. Not justice. Momentum. Thorne's political capital had depended on the illusion of competence. The moment the system proved it had survived despite him, and because of her, that illusion cracked. "We're convening a formal hearing," Evans said, "this afternoon." Anna felt the weight of it then, not fear but exposure. Hearings weren't about truth. They were about records, about which story would be archived and which would be erased. She had learned that lesson early in her career. "Understood," she said. The courtroom was quiet in the way serious places always were, wood-paneled, neutral, designed to make emotion feel out of place. Anna sat at the respondent's table in her dress uniform, posture perfect, expression unreadable. To an outsider, she might have looked small beneath the high ceiling. Rex Thorne did not look small at all. He entered with confidence, flanked by a civilian lawyer who moved like he owned the room. Thorne smiled as he took his seat, nodding to a few familiar faces in the gallery. He believed this was still his arena. Anna didn't look at him. She focused on her breathing. Slow, even, She had trained for pressure that could collapse lungs. This was just air. Thorne's testimony was polished, emotional, crafted for effect. He spoke of disrespect, of being challenged publicly, of a dangerous operator who had lost control. He used words like violence and rage. Anna listened detached. She wasn't insulted. She was fascinated. Every exaggeration introduced error. Every emotional flourish widened the gap between his narrative and reality. Her counsel barely questioned him. That was intentional, because evidence didn't need embellishment. When the videos played, the room changed. Thorne's voice filled the courtroom, loud, aggressive. Anna's was calm, measured. The finger to her shoulder, the ignored step back, the punch. Then the slow-motion replay. No strike. No excess. Only redirection. The silence afterward was absolute. Truth didn't argue, it simply existed. The board didn't deliberate long. When Captain Evans spoke, his voice was firm, but something else lived beneath it. Regret. Director Thorne, he said, your testimony has been found to be materially false. Thorne's confidence drained visibly. Your contract is terminated, your access revoked. Anna felt no satisfaction watching him shrink. Only relief. Because systems mattered more than individuals. The public apology came the next morning. Formation, clear skis, 2,000 sailors standing at attention. Captain Evans addressed them plainly, no euphemisms, no spin. We failed, he said, and we correct failures by acknowledging them. He called Anna forward. When he saluted her, it wasn't ceremonial. It was corrective. The ripple that followed, the salutes rising one after another, felt surreal. Anna held her posture, returned the salute. Inside, something shifted. Not pride. Belonging. Later, alone again, she removed the phoenix patch from its box. This time, she didn't repair it. She simply held it. The phoenix wasn't about rising from ashes. That was a misunderstanding. It was about cycles. About systems correcting themselves through destruction and renewal. She affixed it to her uniform beside a new patch, a single blue signal line cutting through static. Signal and the noise. Anna exhaled. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another problem. There always was. But tonight the system had learned. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it documents. Sometimes it waits. And when the moment comes, it restores order without asking permission. Why did the water feel heavier that morning, as if it remembered everything before she entered it? Anna stood at the edge of the pier before dawn, the sky still undecided between night and day. The horizon carried a thin, bruised line of color, and the sea below reflected it like dark glass. Cold, patient, honest. She preferred the water to people. People remembered selectively. Water remembered everything. Her dive gear was laid out with quiet precision. Each check followed muscle memory older than most of the sailors now saluting her in passing. They did it differently now, slower, more deliberate. Respect had changed their timing. She noticed she didn't comment. The phoenix patch rested on her arm. The new signal in the noise patch sat beside it. Two symbols from different lives, coexisting without conflict. That felt right. Lieutenant Commander Calloway approached, careful not to break her focus. Salvage teams ready, he said. Recovery window is narrow, currents picking up. Anna nodded, it always does. She slipped the regulator into her mouth and turned toward the edge. This was the part she trusted. Gravity. Pressure. Physics that didn't care who you were or what story followed you. She stepped off the pier. The water swallowed her cleanly. The descent stripped the world down to essentials. Sound vanished first, then color, then time. There was no room for the hearing in her mind now, no replay of salutes or apologies. Down here, reputation meant nothing. The sea didn't care that she'd been right. It only cared if she was precise. Her breathing slowed to a steady rhythm. The rebreather hummed softly, an old, familiar companion. At 80 feet, the temperature dropped sharply. At 100, the light thinned to blue shadow. At 140, the wreck came into view. A downed unmanned surveillance craft, classified, damaged during a storm weeks earlier and dragged off course. Its recovery had been delayed, budget debates, priority shifts, committees arguing about acceptable loss. Anna didn't think about that. She thought about angles, stress points, structural fatigue. Her gloved hand brushed the hull. The metal was scored and bent, but intact enough. Someone had built this well. She anchored the line and began the work. On the surface, the base continued its quiet recalibration. The removal of Rex Thorne hadn't made headlines. It never would. Institutions preferred silence to spectacle when correcting themselves, but the cultural shift was unmistakable. Briefings ran longer now. Questions were answered instead of dismissed. Warnings logged by quiet professionals stopped getting buried. Captain Evans noticed it first in the metrics, then in the tone. The swagger was gone. In its place, competence without noise. He knew who had caused that shift, and he knew how close they'd come to losing her. At depth, Anna encountered resistance. A section of the craft had wedged itself into the seabed, suction locking it in place. The recovery plan assumed a clean lift. Reality disagreed. She paused, hovering neutrally buoyant, and assessed. This was the moment where ego ruined missions, when operators forced solutions instead of adjusting them. Anna exhaled slowly. Patience wasn't waiting. Patience was choosing the correct sequence. She adjusted the rigging, redistributed load, introduced a controlled break in suction. Small movements, incremental. The craft released with a muted shudder. No drama, no rush. She secured the line and signaled topside. Mission progressing. Back on the pier, Calloway watched the feed with quiet admiration. Not because the operation was flashy, but because it was. Anna made difficult things look boring. That was the highest compliment in her world. 2 days later, she stood once more in a briefing room. Different recruits this time, fresh faces, nervous energy. She began the same way she always did. Not with stories, with physics. But this time, something was different. They listened. Not because of the legend. Not because of the incident. Because her calm made sense. Halfway through the briefing, one recruit raised a hand, hesitant. "Yes," Anna said. "Senior Chief, how do you know when to act, when not to escalate?" The room stilled. Anna considered the question. Not because she hadn't been asked it before, but because this one was sincere. "You act," she said slowly, "when inaction becomes the greater risk." She paused. "And you stop," she added, "when control is restored, not when you feel satisfied." The recruit nodded, absorbing it. That lesson would stay with him longer than any takedown ever could. That evening, alone again in her quarters, Anna opened her encrypted log. She hesitated before typing. This entry wasn't procedural. It was personal. Subject, system correction observed. Outcome, cultural latency reduced. Observation, accountability increases efficiency. Ego degrades it. She paused, then added one more line. Note: silence is not absence, it is preparation. She closed the file. Later that week, Master Chief Torres found her on the pier. "Command wants you to consider a new role," he said carefully. "Advisory, oversight, big picture." Anna watched the water. Roles were constructs. Work was real. "I'll consider it," she said. She meant it, not because she wanted authority, but because systems needed guardians who understood failure. That night the sea was calm. Anna sat on the edge of the pier, boots dangling just above the waterline. She held the Phoenix patch in one hand, the signal patch in the other. Two truths. One about survival. One about clarity. She stitched them together carefully. Not because they needed it. Because she did. Sometimes redemption isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet return to purpose. And sometimes the strongest statement a person can make is continuing the work, as if dignity never left. Why did the offer feel heavier than any weight she'd ever carried underwater? Anna read the message twice, then a third time, not because it was unclear, but because clarity sometimes created its own kind of pressure. Temporary advisory appointment, cross-domain oversight, direct reporting line. It was the kind of role people chased for decades, the kind that turned operators into names instead of hands, influence without dirt under the nails. She closed the tablet and stared at the wall of her quarters, where the light fell unevenly across bare paint. Being seen had never been her objective, but being ignored had nearly broken the system. That was the problem. The meeting was held in a smaller room than she expected. No flags, no audience, just Captain Evans, the JAG captain, and a civilian analyst she didn't recognize. "Senior Chief," Evans said, motioning for her to sit. "This isn't a promotion, it's a correction." Anna nodded. She appreciated that honesty. "The exercise exposed vulnerabilities," Evans continued. "Technical, procedural, and cultural. We need someone who understands all three." The analyst leaned forward. Someone who isn't interested in protecting turf. Anna felt the familiar internal friction rise. Not anxiety, alignment. They were describing her because she had never wanted to be here. That was exactly why they needed her. "What authority would this role have?" she asked. Evans didn't hesitate. Enough to be inconvenient. That earned the smallest flicker of approval in her eyes. Accepting the role didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility expanding outward, stretching into spaces she had avoided on purpose. Her first week was quiet, intentionally so. She didn't announce changes, she observed. Briefings, training floors, server rooms, places where decisions were made quickly and places where they stalled out of fear. She listened more than she spoke. Patterns emerged. Warnings filtered through too many layers. Experience dismissed if it didn't come with volume. Data buried beneath confidence. None of it was malicious. That was the most dangerous part. One afternoon, she sat in on a planning session for a future exercise. A lieutenant presented a risk assessment, voice uncertain, hands gripping a tablet like a shield. A senior officer interrupted him mid-sentence. "We've run this scenario a dozen times," the officer said. "It's theoretical." Anna didn't speak immediately. She waited. The lieutenant faltered, shrunk, prepared to defer. Anna leaned forward slightly. "What's the failure mode?" she asked the lieutenant. He blinked, looked relieved. "Latency cascade if the primary node fails." "Stop," Anna said gently. "Start again, slower." The room adjusted its rhythm to hers, without realizing it. 10 minutes later, the scenario had changed. Not because she commanded it. Because she clarified it. Words spread differently this time. Not loud, not dramatic. People began requesting her presence, not for authority, but for translation. She had a way of taking fear and turning it into structure. That was her real skill. Not the takedown. Not the salvage. The conversion of chaos into something manageable. Late one night, alone in the operations wing, Anna stood before a wall of live feeds. Global, quiet. She thought about Rex Thorne, not with anger but with curiosity. He had believed strength was volume, that dominance required spectacle. He had never learned how fragile systems really were, and how much they relied on the people willing to stay quiet long enough to understand them. The call came at 200. Real world, not exercise. A forward team operating in contested terrain had gone dark, partial telemetry, conflicting reports, political pressure already mounting. Anna listened, asked questions, ignored urgency that wasn't tied to data. The room watched her closely now, not waiting for permission, but for direction. She gave it. Clear, minimal, exact. No heroics. The team reestablished contact 40 minutes later. No casualties. Afterward, someone said, "You saved them." Anna shook her head. "The system did, I just removed the noise." That night she returned to her quarters later than usual. The silence felt earned. She removed the patches from her uniform carefully, placed them side by side on the desk. The Phoenix. The signal. Past and present. She realized something then, something that surprised her. She wasn't tired. Not of the work. Not of the responsibility. She was tired of pretending that competence should remain invisible to stay pure. That belief had protected her once. Now it was a liability. The next morning she stood before a group of instructors, not recruits, veterans, experienced, skeptical. She didn't lecture. She told them about a system that failed because no one wanted to be wrong first. She told them about silence mistaken for weakness. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. When she finished, the room didn't applaud. They nodded. That was enough. Weeks passed. The bass felt different, not softer. Sharper. Mistakes surfaced earlier. Arguments became about solutions instead of status. Anna remained mostly in the background. But the background had changed shape. One evening, Calloway found her again on the pier. "You're changing things," he said quietly. She watched the horizon. "Things were already changing, I'm just reducing friction." He smiled faintly. "You know, some people still think about the punch." Anna's lips curved slightly, barely. "That was the least important part," she said. Later, alone, she opened her encrypted log. She hesitated, then wrote. Subject: transition phase. Observation: visibility does not equal ego if intention remains procedural. Risk: burnout through moral obligation. Mitigation: return to fundamentals. She closed the file and shut off the light. In the darkness, she thought about the water, about depth, about pressure. Strength, she had learned, wasn't about how hard you hit. It was about how much weight you could carry, without letting it change your shape. And sometimes, the bravest thing an operator could do was step forward. When the system finally learned to listen. Why did the silence feel complete only after everyone else had left? Anna stood alone on the pier long after sunset, the base behind her dimmed to a constellation of yellow lights. The water below moved gently, almost respectfully, as if it recognized her presence. There were no alarms tonight, no urgent calls, no unresolved signals pulsing in the dark. For the first time in weeks, nothing demanded her attention. That was when the weight arrived. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It settled the way pressure does underwater, gradual, undeniable. She had become visible. And visibility, she knew, changed trajectories. The advisory role was no longer temporary. No one said it outright, but the assumption had solidified. Invitations to planning sessions arrived without explanation. Decisions paused until she weighed in. Silence followed her comments, not because people were intimidated, but because they were listening. She had become a reference point. That unsettled her more than conflict ever had. Conflict was sharp, defined, finite. Responsibility was diffuse. It followed you home. The incident with Rex Thorne had already begun to fade into institutional memory, officially resolved, archived, sanitized. That was how it should be. But among the recruits, now sailors, the story had changed shape. It had lost its violence and kept its meaning. They didn't talk about the punch. They talked about what came after. About the woman who didn't defend herself with words. About how she didn't celebrate when she was proven right. About how she returned to work as if nothing had happened, because, to her, nothing had. Anna overheard fragments in passing, in hallways, on the edge of conversations that went quiet when she appeared. She didn't correct them. Stories were systems too. They evolved without permission. The final test came quietly. It always did. A routine night operation flagged an anomaly, minor, easily dismissed. A sensor reading just outside tolerance. The kind of thing that used to get waved through to preserve schedule. Anna noticed it because she always noticed what others were trained to ignore. She paused the operation. The room tensed. Delays cost money, reputation, pride. She asked one question. What happens if we're wrong? No one answered immediately. That was the answer. They ran the deeper check. The anomaly revealed a structural flaw that would have failed catastrophically under load. The operation stood down. No applause. No announcement. Just a quiet correction that prevented a future report written in blood. Anna logged it and moved on. That night she dreamed of water. Not drowning. Floating. Weightless, balanced. She woke before dawn and didn't go back to sleep. Her final briefing wasn't scheduled. She asked for it. Command staff, instructors, senior enlisted. No press, no ceremony. She stood at the front of the room, not elevated, not centered. Just present. I'm stepping out of the advisory role, she said calmly. The room shifted. Evans frowned, Calloway stiffened. This doesn't mean disengagement, Anna continued. It means recalibration. She let the words settle. Systems don't need guardians, she said. They need habits. If integrity depends on one person noticing, it's already failing. Silence. Then understanding. She outlined procedures, redundancies, cultural safeguards. None of it was revolutionary. That was the point. When she finished, no one argued. They didn't need to. Her last day in the role passed without announcement. She returned to operational duty where she belonged, where pressure was physical and variables were honest. The water welcomed her back without judgment. Months later, a new class gathered in the same natatorium. Anna stood beside the pool once more, rebreather components laid out on white cloth. She began the same way. The body doesn't panic first, she said quietly. It lies. The recruits listened. Not because of legend. Because the words were true. After the briefing, one recruit lingered. Senior Chief, she asked hesitantly, were you scared that day? Anna considered the question. Fear wasn't weakness, it was data. Yes, she said, but fear doesn't decide action, preparation does. The recruit nodded, absorbing something deeper than instruction. That evening, Anna returned to her quarters and opened the silver box one last time. The Phoenix patch. Worn, repaired, complete. She didn't put it away. She stitched it onto the inside of her gear bag, where it wouldn't be seen, but would always be there. not as a symbol, as a reminder. Years later, long after names had changed and commands had rotated, a procedural note would remain embedded in training doctrine. A quiet clause, a requirement for evidence review, a pause where ego used to rush. No one would know who had insisted on it. That was fine. Some corrections weren't meant to be credited. On her final dive of the season, Anna descended alone into deep, clear water. The world narrowed to pressure, breath, and time. She felt no anger, no pride, only alignment. Above the surface, systems would continue to falter and correct over and over as they always had. Below it there was only truth. As she hovered neutrally buoyant, perfectly still, Anna understood something fully at last. Strength was not domination. It was restraint. Not the ability to strike, but the discipline to stop. Once balance was restored, sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be seen. Sometimes it simply acts.